Mocked for her scars, she was banished until the alpha vampire chose her as his queen. The silver blade carved through her cheek with surgical precision, sending droplets of crimson across the moonlit courtyard as Serafina's own brother held her down, his eyes cold as winter stone. "No man will ever want a monster like you," he hissed, the ceremonial dagger gleaming as he prepared for the final mark that would brand her as untouchable forever. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. "Please, Marcus," Serafina whispered through tears and blood, her hands trembling against the cold stone beneath her. "I'm still your sister." Marcus Blackwood's laugh echoed off the castle walls like broken glass. "You ceased being my sister the moment Father's will named you heir to Ravencrest." The blade descended again, this time across her forehead, completing the intricate pattern of scars that would mark her as cursed in the eyes of their people. "Now you're nothing but an obstacle to be removed." The Blackwood family had ruled the Northern Territories for 3 centuries, their lineage untainted by the supernatural wars that ravaged the Southern lands. But when Lord Edmund Blackwood died unexpectedly, leaving his vast estate to his scarred daughter rather than his perfect son, the noble houses erupted in fury. A woman, they declared, especially one bearing the marks of a childhood fire that had claimed her beauty, could never lead them against the growing vampire threat. "The banishment decree is already signed," Marcus continued, wiping the ceremonial blade clean on his midnight blue doublet. "You have until dawn to leave Ravencrest lands. Take nothing but the clothes on your back." Serafina struggled to her feet, pressing a torn piece of her nightgown against her bleeding face. The scars were still fresh, but she could already feel them beginning to heal wrong, pulling at her skin in ways that would make her appearance even more grotesque. "And if I refuse, then I'll finish what that fire started 20 years ago." Marcus sheathed his blade with practiced ease. "The choice is yours, dear sister. Exile or death." As the castle guards dragged her through the corridors she had called home for 25 years, Serafina caught glimpses of the servants who had once bowed respectfully. Now they averted their eyes, crossing themselves as if her very presence might bring misfortune upon their families. Lady Catherine Ashford, who had been her closest friend since childhood, actually spat as she passed. "Witch," Catherine hissed. "We always knew there was something unnatural about you surviving that fire." The massive iron gates of Ravencrest Castle closed behind her with a resonant clang that seemed to echo through the pre-dawn darkness. Serafina found herself alone on the cobblestone road that led away from everything she had ever known, wearing only her blood-stained nightgown and a thin cloak that did little to ward off the autumn chill. The first village she reached at midday turned her away before she could even speak. The innkeeper took one look at her scarred face and crossed himself, muttering about demons and curses. The second village allowed her to work in their stables for 3 days before the local priest declared her presence was causing the milk to sour and the chickens to stop laying. For 3 months, Serafina wandered from settlement to settlement, each rejection harder than the last. Her once soft hands became calloused and cracked from manual labor. Her golden hair, previously her one claim to beauty, grew tangled and dull. The fresh scars Marcus had carved into her face healed into raised, silver lines that caught the light in ways that made even small children run crying to their mothers. It was during the first blizzard of winter that she stumbled into Shadowmere Forest, more dead than alive. The snow had been falling for 3 days without pause, and her meager supplies had run out. Hypothermia was setting in, making her thoughts sluggish and her movements uncoordinated. She had heard the legends about this place, how it was home to creatures that fed on human blood, how entire hunting parties had vanished without a trace. But death by supernatural predator seemed preferable to slowly freezing in the wilderness. The ancient trees towered above her like skeletal fingers, their bare branches creating a canopy so thick that almost no snow reached the forest floor. Instead, a carpet of fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet, each step echoing strangely in the unnatural silence. No birds sang here, no small animals rustled through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to die once it entered the forest's domain. Serafina had been walking for perhaps an hour when she realized she was being followed. The sensation started as a prickling at the base of her neck, the instinctive awareness that predator eyes were tracking her every movement. She forced herself not to look back, not to run, because running would only trigger whatever was stalking her to give chase. The attack came without warning. One moment she was alone on the leaf-strewn path, and the next she was pinned against a massive oak tree by something that moved too fast for human eyes to follow. Pale hands with elongated fingers pressed against her throat, and she found herself staring into eyes that gleamed like polished amber in the darkness. The vampire that held her was unlike anything she had expected from the stories. Where the legends spoke of corpse-pale creatures with rotting flesh and feral expressions, this being possessed an otherworldly beauty that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. His skin was marble white but radiant with health, his dark hair falling in waves to his shoulders. He was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with a lean but muscular build that spoke of supernatural strength. But it was his face that captured her attention. High cheekbones and a strong jaw gave him an aristocratic bearing, while his full lips were curved in what might have been amusement. He wore clothing that had once been fine, a black velvet coat with silver embroidery, dark trousers tucked into leather boots, but everything was slightly worn, as if he had been traveling for a very long time. "Well, well," he murmured, and his voice was like aged whiskey, smooth and intoxicating. "What do we have here? A lost little lamb wandering into the wolf's den." Serafina tried to speak, but his grip on her throat made breathing difficult, let alone forming words. She could only stare up at him, waiting for the inevitable moment when those perfect white teeth would lengthen into fangs and her blood would paint the snow red. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her scarred face with an expression of genuine curiosity. His amber eyes traced every line, every raised mark, every imperfection that had made her own people cast her out. "Interesting," he said softly. "Someone has marked you quite thoroughly, but not with teeth or claws." His free hand rose to trace the air just above the scars on her cheek, careful not to actually touch her skin. Blade work, ceremonial by the precision of it. "Please," she managed to whisper, "just make it quick." The vampire's eyebrows rose slightly. "Make what quick?" "My death." Serafina closed her eyes, unable to bear looking at his beautiful face any longer. "I know what you are, what you need. I'm not afraid anymore." To her surprise, he laughed, a rich, genuine sound that seemed completely at odds with the predatory situation. His grip on her throat loosened, though he didn't step away. "Oh, my dear girl, if I wanted you dead, you would have been drained before you even knew I was here." His fingers moved to cup her chin, tilting her face up so she was forced to meet his gaze again. "No, I think you might be far more valuable alive." Valuable? The word came out as barely more than a breath. "My name is Damien Ashworth," he said, as if they were being introduced at a formal gathering rather than in the middle of a supernatural encounter. "And unless I'm very much mistaken, you are Lady Seraphina Blackwood, rightful heir to the Ravencrest territories." Seraphina's blood turned to ice. "How do you know that name?" Damien's smile revealed just a hint of elongated canines. "Because, my scarred beauty, I've been hunting your brother for quite some time. Marcus Blackwood has been selling information about my kind to the Vampire Hunters Guild. Names, locations, weaknesses." His expression hardened, and for a moment she saw the true predator beneath the civilized veneer. "3 of my bloodline are dead because of his betrayal." "That's impossible." But even as she said it, Seraphina knew it wasn't. Marcus had always been ambitious, always resentful that their father's supernatural research had focused on protection rather than exploitation. Marcus would never. Wouldn't he? Damien stepped back, giving her space to breathe properly for the first time since he'd appeared. "Tell me, Lady Blackwood, why did your loving brother carve those particular symbols into your skin before banishing you?" Seraphina's hand rose instinctively to touch the scars on her cheek. "He said it was to mark me as cursed, so no one would shelter me." "Those aren't curse marks," Damien said softly. "They're protection wards. Very old, very powerful magic that shields the bearer from supernatural influence." His amber eyes gleamed with something that might have been admiration. "Your brother may be a treacherous bastard, but he's also cleverer than I gave him credit for. He marked you so that vampires couldn't feed from you, couldn't turn you, couldn't even detect your presence through normal supernatural senses." The implications hit her like a physical blow. He was protecting me? In his own twisted way, yes, though I suspect his motivations were far from altruistic. Damien began to circle her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. "You see, there's been a prophecy circulating among both vampire and human courts for the past century. Something about a scarred queen who would unite our peoples and bring an end to the eternal war." Seraphina pressed herself back against the oak tree, trying to put as much distance between them as possible. "I'm not anyone's queen. I'm just a banished woman with nothing left to lose." "Are you?" Damien stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who's been carved by destiny itself." He gestured to her scars with something approaching reverence. "Do you know what these markings really represent, Seraphina Blackwood?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "They're the ancient symbols of the Night Court, the ruling body of vampire nobility that was destroyed 500 years ago. The same symbols that were carved into the throne of the last vampire emperor before the great uprising scattered our kind to the 4 winds." Damien's voice dropped to a whisper. "Your brother didn't just mark you as untouchable. He branded you as the prophesied queen of a dead empire." The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Seraphina could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could smell the pine and decay of the ancient trees, could feel the supernatural energy that radiated from Damien like heat from a fire. "That's insane," she whispered. "Is it? Then explain how you survived that childhood fire when everyone else in the servants' quarters died. Explain how you've managed to stay alive for 3 months in hostile territory with no resources and no allies. Explain how you walked into Shadowmere Forest, the most dangerous supernatural territory in the Northern Lands, and instead of being torn apart by the creatures that call it home, you found the one vampire in existence who has both the power and the motivation to keep you alive. Damien stepped even closer until she could feel the coolness of his skin even through the inches of space between them. I don't believe in coincidence, Lady Blackwood, and I don't believe in prophecy, but I do believe in opportunity. His lips curved in a smile that was equal parts seductive and threatening. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? The kind that could give you everything your brother stole from you, and more. Damien's voice was hypnotic, compelling, in a way that had nothing to do with supernatural influence. I am Lord of the Eastern Vampire Courts, commander of the largest and most powerful bloodline still in existence. I have wealth beyond imagination, territory that spans 3 kingdoms, and an army of immortal soldiers who would die to protect what's mine. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. But I also have enemies. Human lords who see my people as nothing more than monsters to be hunted. Other vampire courts who believe my methods are too lenient, too willing to coexist peacefully with mortal society. And somewhere in the shadows, there are those who remember the old ways, who would see the Night Court restored, with themselves on the throne. Serafina found herself listening despite every instinct screaming at her to run. What does any of this have to do with me? Everything. Damien's hand rose to hover just above her scarred cheek, close enough that she could feel the otherworldly energy radiating from his skin. I need a queen, Serafina. Someone who can bridge the gap between human and vampire society. Someone who understands both worlds, who has suffered at the hands of both, who has every reason to want to see the current order overturned. You want me to marry you. It wasn't a question. I want you to rule beside me, he corrected. Marriage is a human institution, and while I'm willing to observe the formalities if necessary, what I'm offering goes far deeper than any ceremony or legal contract. His amber eyes seemed to glow in the forest shadows. I'm offering you immortality, power, the chance to remake the world in your own image. Serafina's laugh was bitter. You want to turn me into a monster? I want to turn you into a goddess. Damien's voice carried absolute conviction. The transformation process is intense, but you would emerge stronger, faster, more beautiful than any mortal could ever hope to be. The scars that mark you as an outcast among your own people would become symbols of your divine right to rule mine. And in return, you help me unite the vampire courts under one banner. You lend your legitimacy as the prophesied queen to establish a new order that protects both human and vampire interests. You stand beside me as we build an empire that will last for millennia. His expression grew serious. It won't be easy, Serafina. There will be those who challenge us, who try to destroy what we're building, but together we would be unstoppable. The wind picked up, sending a cascade of dead leaves swirling around them. Serafina pulled her thin cloak tighter, shivering not just from the cold, but from the magnitude of what he was proposing. And if I refuse? Damien was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, there was something almost sad in his voice. Then I'll escort you safely to the southern border and give you enough gold to start a new life somewhere far from the supernatural wars. You'll be free to live out your mortal years in whatever peace you can find. You wouldn't kill me? For what purpose? He shook his head. I'm not in the habit of murdering innocent women, regardless of their strategic value. If you choose to walk away, that's your right." His lips curved in a rueful smile. "Though I suspect you'd spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Serafina closed her eyes, trying to process everything he'd told her. 3 months ago, she had been the heir to a powerful noble house, comfortable in her place in the world, despite the scars that marked her as different. Now, she was being offered the chance to become something beyond human comprehension, to wield power that most people couldn't even imagine. But at what cost? "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked finally. "About the prophecy, about my scars, about any of it?" Damien reached into his coat and withdrew a leather-bound book that looked ancient even by vampire standards. The cover was decorated with the same symbols that Marcus had carved into her skin, though these were embossed in what looked like silver and inlaid with tiny gems. This is the Chronicle of the Night Court, written by the last vampire emperor before his death. It contains the complete prophecy, along with detailed descriptions of the signs that would herald the coming of the Scarred Queen. He opened the book to a page near the middle and held it out for her inspection. The text was written in a language she didn't recognize, but the illustrations were clear enough. A woman with marks on her face that perfectly matched Serafina's scars, standing beside a dark-haired vampire on a throne made of black stone and silver. "This book is over 500 years old," Damien said quietly. "It was written centuries before you were born, before your bloodline even existed. Yet, there you are, described in perfect detail." Serafina stared at the illustration, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The woman in the picture didn't just share her scars. She had the same bone structure, the same shape of eyes, even the same shade of golden hair. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not just her appearance, but her destiny. "There's more," Damien continued, turning several pages. "The prophecy speaks of a great fire that would mark the chosen one, of a brother's betrayal that would cast her into exile, of a meeting in the Shadow Wood when the first snows fell." He looked up at her with those mesmerizing amber eyes. "Tell me, Serafina Blackwood, does any of this sound familiar?" She wanted to deny it, to dismiss everything as elaborate lies designed to manipulate her into compliance. But the evidence was right there in front of her, written in an ancient hand by someone who had died long before her grandparents were born. Either this was the most elaborate deception in history, or she really was standing at the center of something far larger than herself. "Assuming I believe you," she said carefully, "assuming everything you've told me is true, what happens next? Do you just bite me and make me into a vampire?" Damien laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the forest silence. "The transformation process is considerably more complex than that, especially for someone bearing protection wards as powerful as yours. First, the marks would need to be redirected. Instead of shielding you from supernatural influence, they would need to be modified to channel and focus your power as an immortal. That sounds painful." "It would be." His expression grew serious again. "I won't lie to you about that, Serafina. The process of becoming what I am is not for the weak or the fearful. It requires a strength of will that most mortals don't possess." His gaze traveled over her scarred face, her worn clothing, her hands that bore the calluses of months of hard labor. "But I think you've already proven you have that strength." A distant howl echoed through the trees, long and mournful, and definitely not human. Damien's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body tensing with predatory alertness. "We need to move," he said urgently. "The werewolf packs hunt in this area, and they're not as civilized in their approach to humans as I am." "Werewolves are real too?" "Oh, my dear girl, you have no idea how real the supernatural world is." Damien took her hand, his skin cool and smooth against her rough palm. Come, my stronghold isn't far from here, and you'll be safe there while you consider my offer." As they moved deeper into the forest, Seraphina found herself studying her unlikely companion. Despite his supernatural nature, despite the predatory grace with which he moved through the shadows, there was something almost lonely about him. He carried himself with the bearing of absolute authority, but she caught moments when his expression grew distant, as if he were remembering things that brought him pain. "How long have you been alone?" she asked impulsively. Damien glanced at her, surprised by the question. "What makes you think I'm alone?" "The way you move, the way you talk. You're used to being in command, but you're not used to having equals, not real equals." She stumbled slightly over a hidden root, and his hand tightened on hers to steady her. "How long since you've had someone you could trust completely?" For a moment, his mask of supernatural composure slipped, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his amber eyes. 200 years, he said quietly, give or take a decade. What happened? She chose mortality over immortality, love over power. His voice was carefully neutral, but Seraphina could hear the pain beneath the words. "I offered her everything I'm offering you, and she walked away without looking back." They walked in silence after that, following paths that seemed to exist more by supernatural instinct than any human design. The trees grew larger and more ancient as they traveled, their trunks so massive that it would take a dozen people holding hands to encircle them. Strange flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the sound of running water. The stronghold, when they finally reached it, was nothing like what Seraphina had expected. Instead of a Gothic castle or crumbling mansion, she found herself looking at a structure that seemed to grow directly out of the living rock of the mountainside. It was beautiful in an alien way, all flowing lines and organic curves that made it seem more like a work of art than a fortress. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "It was built by the Earth Fae centuries ago," Damien explained as he led her up the winding path to the main entrance. "They owed me a debt, and this was how they chose to repay it. The stone itself is alive, in a way. It responds to the emotions and intentions of those who dwell within it." The massive doors opened at their approach, revealing an interior that was both elegant and comfortable. Rich tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of supernatural courts and legendary battles. Furniture that looked both ancient and timeless was arranged in conversation areas around fireplaces that burned with flames of every color imaginable. "Are you hungry?" Damien asked as they entered what appeared to be a great hall. "Thirsty? The journey through the forest can be taxing for mortals." As if summoned by his words, her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal, and the stress of their conversation had left her feeling weak and shaky. Yes, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Damien gestured to a chair near one of the colorful fireplaces. "Rest. I'll have food brought." He disappeared through what looked like a solid wall, leaving Seraphina alone to study her surroundings. The chair he'd indicated was incredibly comfortable, upholstered in fabric that felt like silk but was warm to the touch in a way that suggested supernatural origin. The fire crackling in the hearth gave off no smoke, and the flames danced in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Despite everything that had happened, despite the impossibility of her situation, Seraphina found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The stronghold felt safe in a way that nowhere had since her banishment. There was something about the living stone walls that seemed to radiate protection and welcome. When Damien returned, he was carrying a tray laden with food that made her mouth water instantly. Fresh bread with butter, roasted meat that smelled of herbs and spices, fruit that looked like it had been picked that morning, and a goblet of wine that sparkled with an inner light. "Some of this is from my own stores," he said, setting the tray on a small table within her reach. "But the fruit and wine are gifts from allies in the supernatural community. The wine, in particular, has some interesting properties." Serafina took a cautious sip and felt warmth spread through her body, easing aches and pains she hadn't even realized she was carrying. What kind of properties? Healing, primarily. It won't work miracles, but it should help with the effects of your long journey. Damien settled into the chair across from her, moving with that unnaturally fluid grace that marked him as something other than human. It will also help you think more clearly about the decision you need to make. As she ate, Serafina found herself studying him more closely. In the firelight, his supernatural beauty was even more pronounced, but she was beginning to see past the perfect features to the person beneath. There was intelligence in his amber eyes, and a kind of weary wisdom that spoke of centuries of experience. But there was also loneliness and a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. "Tell me about her," she said impulsively. "The woman who chose mortality." Damien was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and distant. "Her name was Elena. She was human, like you, but born into one of the old magical families. A witch, though she rarely used her power." He stared into the dancing flames as if seeing the past in their depths. "She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, intelligent, brave enough to stand up to me when I was being an arrogant fool." "What happened?" "I fell in love with her. Completely, utterly, desperately in love, in a way that I hadn't experienced in over 1,000 years of existence." His laugh was bitter. "I thought she felt the same way. For 50 years, we were happy. I gave her everything I could think of: wealth, power, protection from her enemies. I even helped her family establish themselves as one of the most influential magical dynasties in the southern kingdoms." Serafina continued eating, but her attention was entirely focused on his words. There was pain in his voice that was almost too raw to witness. "When I finally offered her immortality, I was certain she would accept. We had talked about the future, about the children we might have, about the empire we could build together." Damien's hands clenched into fists in his lap. "Instead, she told me that she could never be truly happy, knowing she would outlive everyone she loved. Her family, her friends, the mortal world she had grown up in. She said that immortality wasn't a gift, it was a curse that she wouldn't wish on her worst enemy." "She left you." "She disappeared in the night, taking nothing but the clothes on her back. I searched for her for decades, but she had help from her family's magic, powerful concealment spells that hid her from both supernatural and mundane detection." His amber eyes met hers across the firelight. "I found her grave 40 years later. She had lived a full mortal life, married a human man, raised children, died surrounded by grandchildren she loved." The pain in his voice was so raw that Serafina felt her own eyes fill with tears. "I'm sorry." "Are you? Or are you wondering if you're just a replacement for something I lost long ago?" Damien's gaze was direct, challenging. "It's a fair question, Serafina. Am I offering you this opportunity because I see something special in you, or because you remind me of what I can never have back?" It was a fair question, and one she had been wondering about since he first mentioned Elena. "Which is it?" "Both," he admitted with startling honesty. "I won't lie to you about that. There are similarities between you and her. Not physical ones, but something in your spirit, your refusal to be broken by circumstances that would destroy most people." He leaned forward in his chair, his intense gaze holding hers. "But you're not Elena, Serafina. You're something entirely different, something that I think could be far more dangerous and far more powerful than she ever was." Dangerous how? Elena was born to magic, raised to understand supernatural politics, trained from childhood to navigate the complex web of alliances and enmities that define our world. But she was also sheltered, protected by her family's status and power. She never truly understood what it meant to lose everything, to be cast out and forced to survive on nothing but will and determination. Damien's voice grew intense, almost hypnotic. You, on the other hand, have been forged by suffering, tempered by rejection and loss, and the kind of desperation that either breaks a person completely or transforms them into something extraordinary. Serafina set down the goblet of sparkling wine, her head swimming slightly from either the alcohol or the implications of his words. "You think suffering makes me a better candidate for immortal queenship? I think suffering makes you someone who understands the true value of power." Elena saw immortality as a burden because she had never lived without the protection of her family's influence. "You've spent months learning what it means to be powerless, to be at the mercy of others' cruelty and indifference." His smile was sharp as a blade. "When I offer you the chance to ensure that no one can ever hurt you again, you understand exactly what that means." The fire crackled in the hearth, sending shadows dancing across the walls in patterns that seemed almost alive. Serafina found herself thinking about the past 3 months, about every rejection, every cruel word, every night spent shivering in some makeshift shelter because no one would give her sanctuary. Then she thought about Marcus, safe and warm in the castle that should have been hers, probably already planning his next betrayal. "The protection wards he carved into me," she said slowly. "Could they really be changed to focus power instead of deflecting it? With the right knowledge and preparation, yes. It would require a ritual performed during a lunar eclipse, which conveniently occurs in 3 days' time. The process itself would take most of the night, and it would be—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "Imagine every moment of physical pain you've ever experienced concentrated into a few hours of absolute agony. That's what it would take to redirect the ward marks. And then? Then you would sleep for 3 days while your body underwent the fundamental changes necessary to support immortal life. When you woke, you would be stronger than any human, faster than any mortal creature, beautiful in ways that would make mortals weep just to look at you. You would heal from any injury short of complete destruction. Age would never touch you again. And you would possess supernatural abilities that vary from individual to individual, but always include some form of mental influence over lesser beings. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, too good to be true. What's the catch?" Damien's expression grew serious. "You would need to feed on human blood to maintain your strength. Not constantly, once or twice a month would be sufficient, but regularly enough that you could never completely escape the predatory nature of what you would become. You would also become vulnerable to certain materials and circumstances that are harmless to mortals. Pure silver burns our skin. Direct sunlight causes severe pain, though it won't kill the older vampires. And there are certain blessed objects that can cause significant harm. Would I have to kill people to feed? Not necessarily. Blood freely given by willing donors is actually more nourishing than blood taken by force. Many of the older vampires maintain relationships with humans who provide what we need in exchange for protection and certain benefits. His smile suggested that some of those benefits were more pleasurable than others. Though in times of war or extreme necessity, we do what we must to survive. Serafina stood up and walked to one of the large windows that looked out over the forest. The snow was falling more heavily now, and she could see lights moving among the distant trees. Whether they belonged to human travelers or supernatural creatures, she couldn't tell. If I agree to this, if I go through with the transformation, what happens to my humanity? Do I stop caring about mortal concerns? Stop feeling the way I do now? Your emotions will become more intense, not less. Love, hate, joy, sorrow, all of it becomes magnified when you no longer have to worry about the constraints of a mortal lifespan. Damien joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin. As for caring about mortals, that varies from vampire to vampire. Some of us become protective of humanity, seeing ourselves as guardians of a species we once belonged to. Others grow contemptuous of mortal weakness and regard humans as nothing more than cattle. Which are you? I try to be the former, though I don't always succeed. His reflection in the window glass was strange, present but somehow translucent, as if he weren't entirely solid. There have been times when I've made decisions that prioritized vampire interests over human welfare. Times when I've allowed mortals to die to protect my people. I'm not asking you to see me as some noble protector, Serafina. I'm a predator who has learned to be selective about his prey. His honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. At least he wasn't trying to pretend he was something other than what he was. And you want me to become the same thing. I want you to become something better than what I am. The prophecy speaks of a scarred queen who would bridge the gap between our peoples, who would find a way for vampires and humans to coexist without the constant threat of war. Damien turned to face her fully. I've been trying to achieve that goal for 2 centuries, but I'm too much a creature of the supernatural world to truly understand mortal concerns. You, however, were raised human. You understand both the nobility and the pettiness that drives mortal behavior. You think I could actually unite 2 species that have been at war for centuries? I think you're the only one who has a chance of doing it. His amber eyes seemed to glow in the window's reflection. But it would require you to be willing to make hard choices, to sometimes sacrifice the few for the sake of the many. It would mean becoming someone who inspires both love and fear, respect and obedience. The weight of what he was proposing settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. 3 days ago, her greatest concern had been finding enough food to survive another week. Now she was being asked to become an immortal queen and reshape the political structure of the supernatural world. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, you have 3 days until the eclipse. Take as long as you need. Damien gestured toward a doorway that she hadn't noticed before. I've had chambers prepared for you. They're warded against intrusion and stocked with everything you might need. You'll be completely safe here, regardless of what you decide. The rooms he led her to were more luxurious than anything she had experienced even in her father's castle. The bedroom featured a massive 4-poster bed with curtains of midnight blue silk, while the sitting area included a writing desk, comfortable chairs, and shelves lined with books in a dozen different languages. A fire burned merrily in the marble fireplace, and through the tall windows she could see a private garden where impossible flowers bloomed despite the winter snow. The books contain information about vampire history, supernatural politics, and the prophecies surrounding the Night Court, Damien explained as she explored the space. If you're going to make an informed decision, you should understand exactly what you would be getting involved in. After he left, Serafina found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since their encounter in the forest. She bathed in water that seemed to wash away not just the grime of her journey, but some of the bone-deep exhaustion she had been carrying. The clothes provided for her were simple but well-made, cut from fabric that felt like silk but seemed to regulate her body temperature automatically. She spent the rest of the evening reading, starting with a basic history of vampire society that painted a picture far more complex than the simple monsters versus humans narrative she had grown up with. According to the texts, vampires had once lived openly among mortals, serving as advisors to kings and protectors of human settlements. It was only after a series of betrayals and misunderstandings that the two species had become enemies. The prophecy that mentioned her was contained in a slim volume bound in what looked like scales rather than leather. The language was archaic and full of metaphor, but the basic message was clear. A woman bearing the marks of the Old Kingdom would rise to restore balance between the world of the living and the realm of the undead. She would be tested by fire and betrayal, cast out by those who should have protected her, and found by the last prince of the fallen dynasty when hope seemed lost. The description was so accurate that reading it made her skin crawl. Either this was the most elaborate deception ever created, or she really was caught up in something far larger than herself. On the second day, Damien returned with news that made her blood run cold. "Marcus has made his move," he said without preamble as she looked up from her reading. "He's announced your death and claimed full lordship of the Ravencrest territories. More concerning, he's also signed a formal alliance with the Vampire Hunters Guild." Seraphina set down the book she had been studying, a detailed analysis of supernatural treaty law, and gave him her full attention. What kind of alliance? The kind that grants the guild access to your family's ancient archives in exchange for military support in establishing Marcus as the legitimate ruler of the Northern Territories. Damien's expression was grim. Those archives contain 5 centuries worth of research on supernatural weaknesses, ward construction, and protective magic. In the wrong hands, that information could turn the tide of the entire conflict. How do you know all this? I have spies in most of the major human courts. It pays to know what one's enemies are planning. He moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered garden with obvious tension. There's more, Seraphina. The guild has put a bounty on my head, 10,000 gold pieces for my death or capture. They're mobilizing every hunter in the northern kingdoms. The implications hit her like a physical blow. They're coming here. Almost certainly. My stronghold is well protected, but it's not invisible. Given enough time and resources, they'll find it. Damien turned back to face her, and she was surprised to see something like vulnerability in his amber eyes. Which means you need to make your decision sooner than planned. How much sooner? Tonight, if possible. The eclipse begins at moonrise. If you're going to undergo the transformation, it needs to happen during the peak of the lunar event. His voice grew urgent. I won't pressure you, Seraphina, but I need you to understand the stakes. If the guild takes me alive, they'll torture information out of me about every vampire safe house, every ally, every weakness in our defenses. Thousands of my people will die. Seraphina felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again, heavier than before. And if I become what you're offering to make me, I could help you fight them. You could help me save both our peoples, he corrected. A vampire queen with a legitimate claim to human nobility could negotiate treaties that I never could. You could offer the guild something they want more than my death, an end to the supernatural war that's been draining resources from both sides for centuries. She stood up and began pacing the length of the sitting room, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. What if the transformation fails? What if I'm not strong enough to survive it? Then you die, and I face the guild alone. Damien's honesty was brutal, but somehow comforting. I won't lie to you about the risks, Seraphina. The mortality rate for adult transformations is nearly 50%, and that's under ideal conditions. With the added complication of redirecting your protection wards, the odds become even worse. But if I survive? If you survive, you become something unprecedented in supernatural history. A vampire queen with a legitimate bloodline claim to human territory, bearing the marks of the ancient Night Court, prophesied to unite our divided worlds. His amber eyes blazed with something that might have been hope. Together, we could accomplish things that neither of our peoples could achieve alone. Serafina stopped pacing and faced him directly. I need to know one more thing before I decide. Ask, do you love me? The question came out more bluntly than she had intended, but she needed to know. Or am I just a convenient tool for accomplishing your political goals? Damien was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. I don't know yet. I find you fascinating, intriguing. There's a strength in you that calls to something in my nature that I thought Elena had killed forever. He moved closer, until she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. But love? Real love? That's something that grows over time, through shared experiences and mutual trust. I can't promise you love, Serafina, but I can promise you that I will try to be worthy of yours. It was perhaps the most honest answer he could have given, and somehow that made it more reassuring than any declaration of instant devotion would have been. If I do this, if I become your queen, I want your word that you'll never lie to me. No matter how difficult the truth might be, you have it. And I want equal say in any decisions that affect both our peoples. Not consultation, actual partnership. Damien smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, it reached his eyes. I would expect nothing less from a Blackwood. Serafina took a deep breath, thinking about everything she was leaving behind and everything she might be gaining. Her old life was gone regardless. Marcus had seen to that when he branded her and cast her out. She could spend the rest of her mortal years as a powerless exile, or she could seize this chance to become something extraordinary. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll undergo the transformation." The ritual chamber was located deep beneath the stronghold, carved from living rock, and decorated with symbols that seemed to shift and move in the flickering candlelight. A raised dais in the center held what looked like an altar made from black stone, surrounded by intricate circles of silver inlay that formed patterns too complex for human eyes to follow completely. "The eclipse will reach its peak in 2 hours," Damien explained as he made final preparations. "The actual transformation process takes about 6 hours from start to finish, so we need to begin soon if we want to catch the optimal lunar alignment." Serafina studied the altar with growing apprehension. It looked disturbingly like the sacrificial slabs described in the more lurid tales about supernatural rituals. What exactly does the process involve? First, the redirection of your protection wards. That requires carving new symbols over the existing scars, not deep but precise. The pain will be considerable. Damien set out an array of silver instruments that gleamed with their own inner light. "Once the wards are properly modified, I'll need to drain most of your blood and replace it with my own. Your body will fight the change at first, which is why the mortality rate is so high." "And if I survive that part?" "Then your body will begin the fundamental alterations necessary to support immortal life. Bone density increases, muscle fiber becomes more efficient, neural pathways are enhanced to handle supernatural sensory input. Most people lose consciousness during this phase and don't wake up for several days." His amber eyes met hers with absolute seriousness. "I need to warn you, Serafina. If you change your mind at any point before we begin, you can still walk away. But once the process starts, there's no stopping it. You'll either emerge as a vampire, or you'll die trying." She nodded, surprised by how calm she felt. Perhaps it was the supernatural wine she had been drinking, or perhaps she had simply moved beyond fear into a place of acceptance. I understand. Then we should begin. The modification of the ward marks was every bit as agonizing as Damien had promised. Using tools that seemed to be made of crystallized moonlight rather than conventional metal, he carefully carved new patterns over the scars Marcus had left on her face and throat. Each cut felt like liquid fire running through her veins, and by the time he finished, she was barely conscious from the pain. "The hard part is done," he murmured, his cool hands gentle as they wiped away the blood from her face. "The new wards are already beginning to integrate with your life force. Can you feel the difference?" She could. Where before the scars had felt like dead weight on her skin, now they seemed to pulse with their own energy. The pain was fading, replaced by a strange tingling sensation that made her feel more alive than she had in months. Good. Now comes the blood exchange. Damien helped her lie back on the stone altar, which was surprisingly warm despite its appearance. This part is actually less painful than what we just did, though it can be disorienting. He was right about the disorientation. As her human blood flowed out of carefully made incisions in her wrists, Serafina felt herself becoming detached from physical sensation. The world grew distant and dreamlike, as if she were viewing everything through thick glass. When Damien pressed his own bleeding wrist to her lips, the taste of his blood was like nothing she had ever experienced, rich and complex, with an underlying flavor that spoke of centuries and power and things beyond mortal understanding. The changes began almost immediately. She could feel her heart slowing, then stopping completely, only to restart with a rhythm that was subtly different from before. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes dancing in the candlelight. Her hearing became so acute that she could distinguish the sound of snow falling on the ground far above their underground chamber. But with the enhanced senses came pain unlike anything she had ever imagined. Every cell in her body felt like it was being torn apart and rebuilt from the ground up. Her bones ached as they became denser and stronger. Her muscles cramped and spasms as they reorganized themselves for supernatural strength and speed. Even her hair and fingernails hurt as they became more resilient than any mortal equivalent. Through it all, Damien stayed beside her, his cool hands offering what comfort they could. He spoke to her constantly, his voice serving as an anchor to consciousness when the pain threatened to drag her into madness. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured during one of the worst phases, when she was certain her skeleton was going to crack apart from the pressure of the changes. "Your body is accepting the transformation better than I dared hope. Just a little longer, and the worst will be over." Time became meaningless in that chamber of transformation. She might have been lying on that altar for hours or days, there was no way to tell. But eventually, blessedly, the agony began to fade. Her new heartbeat settled into a steady rhythm. The fire in her veins cooled to a more manageable warmth. And when she finally managed to open her eyes, the world looked completely different. Everything was sharper, more vivid, more real than it had ever been before. She could see the individual threads in Damien's clothing, could hear his breathing, even though she knew vampires didn't technically need to breathe, could smell traces of ancient magic lingering in the very stones of the chamber. But most surprisingly, she could sense his emotions. Not read his thoughts, but feel the relief and joy and something deeper radiating from him like heat from a fire. "Welcome to immortality, Queen Serafina," he said softly, and his smile was radiant. She tried to sit up and discovered that her body responded differently than before. What should have been a simple movement launched her upright so quickly that she nearly overshot and fell off the other side of the altar. "That's going to take some getting used to," she said. and was surprised by how different her own voice sounded. Richer, more melodious, with an undertone that seemed to vibrate in the bones of anyone listening. Most new vampires spend their first few weeks accidentally destroying furniture while they learn to control their strength, Damien said with obvious amusement. But we may not have that luxury. Listen. Serafina focused her newly enhanced hearing and immediately picked up sounds that would have been inaudible to her mortal ears. Distant voices, the clatter of horses' hooves on stone, the distinctive ring of steel being drawn from scabbards. The guild? A full hunting party from the sound of it. Perhaps 50 hunters, along with their support staff and siege equipment. Damien helped her down from the altar, moving slowly to accommodate her still adjusting coordination. They've found the stronghold. How long do we have? An hour, perhaps 2 if we're fortunate.
The outer defenses will slow them down, but they won't stop a force that size indefinitely. He handed her a set of clothing that looked like it had been designed for combat. Dark leather reinforced with what appeared to be scales, cut to allow for freedom of movement while providing protection for vital areas. Can you fight? Serafina flexed her hands experimentally and watched claws extend from her fingertips like curved daggers. I think so, though I have no idea how to use any of this. She gestured to her transformed body. The instincts will come when you need them. For now, focus on moving carefully and following my lead. Damien was already dressed in similar combat gear, and she noticed for the first time that he carried weapons, a sword that seemed to be made from the same crystallized moonlight as the ritual tools, and several knives that hummed with supernatural energy. As they made their way through the stronghold's corridors, Serafina became aware of other presences. Vampires who served Damien, emerging from hidden chambers and secret passages to prepare for the coming battle. There were perhaps 20 of them, all moving with the same inhuman grace that she was still learning to control. "My lord," one of them said as they reached what appeared to be a war room filled with maps and tactical displays. "The guild forces have breached the outer perimeter. They're led by Captain Marcus Blackwood and someone calling himself the Crimson Hunter." Serafina felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest at the mention of her brother's name. "Marcus is here? It seems your loving sibling is personally leading the charge to destroy us," Damien said grimly. "Which actually works in our favor. If we can capture him, we might be able to negotiate with the guild before this becomes a massacre." "You want to negotiate?" She was surprised. "After everything they've done." "I want to minimize casualties on both sides." "Despite what the stories say, I don't enjoy killing humans. They die so easily that there's no sport in it, and each death creates more grieving families who have reason to hate my kind." Damien studied the tactical display, where moving lights showed the positions of the approaching forces. "Besides, this could be an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership you'll need to provide as queen." The thought of facing Marcus again, especially in her transformed state, filled her with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "What did you have in mind?" "A parley. You're still technically the rightful heir to the Blackwood lands, regardless of what Marcus has declared. If you can convince the guild that you're willing to work with them rather than against them, we might be able to avoid this battle entirely." It was a reasonable plan, but Serafina could already see the flaw in it. "They'll never accept me as anything other than a monster now. I'm exactly what they've been trained to hunt and kill. Which is why you need to show them that you're something more than just another vampire." Damien's amber eyes were intense with conviction. "You need to prove that you're still the woman who should have inherited Ravencrest, who understands human concerns and human needs."
Show them that an alliance with you offers them something they could never achieve through warfare alone. The sounds of battle were growing closer, the clash of steel against supernatural defenses, the shouts of human warriors, the inhuman roars of Damien's people as they fought to protect their home. Time was running out. "All right," Seraphina said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Let's try negotiation. But I meant your promise that if this goes wrong, if they refuse to listen, you'll let me handle Marcus myself." Damien's smile was sharp as a blade. "My dear queen, I wouldn't dream of denying you that satisfaction." The main courtyard of the stronghold had been transformed into a battlefield. Supernatural warriors moved like deadly shadows among the ancient stone pillars, while guild hunters responded with weapons that blazed with blessed silver and holy fire. The air was thick with the smell of blood and magic, and the snow underfoot was already stained red.